the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. We're having quite a week this week on a run on AI and humanity. A couple of days ago, we had Matt Bean, an academic at UC Santa Barbara. He has a new book out called The Skill Code: How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines. It's the old question of humanity and AI. Then yesterday, we had the University of Edinburgh academic Shannon Valor on the show. She has a new book out, The AI Mirror: How to Reclaim Our Humanity in an Age of Machine Thinking. And we're continuing that theme today with my guest, Madhumita Murgia, who is the author of Codependent: Living in the Shadow of AI. It's a book, once again, about what it means to be a human in a world changed by AI. Madhumita is joining us from a rather hot South London, from Beckenham. Madhu, congratulations on the new book. It's already been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction in 2024. Your day job is at the FT. I don't quite know how you do it with all your children and your books and your journalism. Tell me about this question of humanity and AI. It comes up, it seems, in every book. One of the things that I struggle with, though, is that no one can quite define what they mean by humanity.
Yeah, so I think there tends to be often a sort of fascination with the technology itself, right? The name artificial intelligence, it just conjures up these sort of science fiction images, and just this idea that we've managed to create something that could be, that could supersede us, that could somehow kind of eclipse the human species is a really fascinating idea. But here we are today. It's not the future, it's now. And you already have pretty, in some cases, super intelligent systems, right? There are many examples in which AI is better than humans at doing things. And it's being rolled out via tech companies based where you are that reach billions of people all at once. And so now we've suddenly started to grapple with the question of, okay, if we've got these systems in our schools, in our hospitals, in our offices, how does that change how we work and how we live? And so to me, the question of humanity is really about people, about our personal relationships, how we parent, how we learn, how we work. And that's kind of those are the people I went out to talk to and what I went to find.
As I mentioned, yesterday's show was with Shannon Valor. I'm sure you're familiar with her book, The AI Mirror.
Yes.
Your book, Codependent, talks about living in the shadow of AI. So for you, is AI more of a I don't know, a big sun, something that we're living in the shadow of, versus a mirror? Or are these metaphors of mirrors and shadows? And perhaps we can trace that back to Plato's Republic and his image of shadows and suns and mirrors. Are they useful for AI?
Yeah, I think that like any technology, and actually even the title of my book is a metaphor or a pun, right? It's about the codependency, how we evolve alongside AI technologies. It's not just us who shape the technologies or build it, but in turn, like Shannon's book, it kind of reflects us back. And this is, literally the technical way in which it's built. It's built and trained on data that we generate, our words, our music, our images and art. And so, of course, it reflects society back to us. But the reason I have this kind of shadow in the title or the subtitle of my book is also to kind of get us to think about the the dark side of it as well as the opportunities and the potential. And I think, we're in a moment, a very exciting moment, where the technology is scaling up, exploding. If we hear from tech companies, it's all upside, right? It's going to solve the climate crisis, it's going to solve healthcare problems. We're all going to live in a world where we have universal high income, we don't need to work. But what I saw in reality was something quite different. And I think it's not to say that I'm a pessimist necessarily about the technology or think that it should be scrapped. But I think, today, the real kind of ways in which AI is being implemented, there are some pretty dark stories. And I think if we want to live in a world where we can coexist with it, we need to acknowledge those and actually reveal those stories as well.
Madhu, there's been an ongoing debate. You're the FT person on algorithms, so you're all too familiar with this. You're the artificial intelligence editor there. There's been an ongoing debate really ever since the internet was invented or became popular in the 90s, particularly since Web 2.0 at the beginning of the 21st century, about the inequalities that the internet is compounding, inequalities of work, of wealth, of income, of influence, of education. Your book pursues those inequalities, those injustices. Is there anything different, though, about what AI is doing than what Amazon did, or what social networks like Facebook or what Google did?
Well, yes, I think it deepens those, and that's so. When we look at what Amazon and Facebook and the sort of apps and mobile apps built on top of the mobile web did, it brought us all of these kind of services to our fingertips. And as you say, there's always been this question of who has access to devices and the internet and who doesn't, and how that's kind of shaped the world, right? The haves and the have-nots. I think with AI that deepens because of how much more ubiquitous it's going to become in sort of, and it already is becoming, in consequential areas of life. So of course now, we all communicate via the internet, largely learn on the internet. But with AI, it's also entering into our hospitals, right? You're increasingly seeing these systems being trained to help diagnose, essentially to kind of play the role of junior doctors, is where this is moving. You're seeing it entering criminal justice. We all have examples in Amsterdam that I talk about, where you have predictive systems that are trying to predict which children will go on to commit crimes. In the US, you have AI systems that decide who should get bail or parole based on kind of previous data. And government services too. You have governments all over the world that are deciding how to sort of distribute their resources, their public resources, using these systems. It's embedded into sort of public services as well. So I just think, yes, the infrastructure and social media reaches a lot of people, but AI is going to actually be embedded into decision making in a way that, if it does exacerbate inequalities, it's going to scale up much more quickly, and create these sort of two-class systems, I think, of those who can access it and those who can't.
Madhu, one would expect a critique implicitly in some ways of capitalism from academics like Shannon Valor and Matt Bean, but you work at the FT, one of the cathedrals, or intellectually at least, of capitalism. When it comes to AI, billions, perhaps even trillions of dollars are now being invested in the economy. Isn't it inevitable that these companies pursue profit? And it's always been the case, even before industrialization, but certainly since the industrialization of the 19th century, which formed contemporary capitalism, that these things are kind of inevitable, aren't they?
Yeah, so I would say that my argument isn't that a Google shouldn't pursue profitability, right? I think the idea that OpenAI could be a non-profit that's governed for the benefit of humanity is, it just doesn't work out. And you can see in practice what that looks like when they are tried to, people do try to hold them to account, like happened, with the board upset last year. And so it's not, the argument isn't that these companies shouldn't be pursuing that. Of course, that's kind of their incentives. That's what they're built to do. And they drive innovation forward as well, which there is a role for, right? But increasingly, they're starting to move beyond just playing the role of a corporation, where everybody understands what their role is and what their incentives incentives are. Increasingly, they're starting to, provide infrastructure to states and become sort of so meshed in many cases, more well-resourced, reaching more people than many governments too, right? And, in many cases, government infrastructure relies on these companies. So you're starting to kind of have them, become quasi-state like institutions. And this is, quite interesting. I talked to a couple of people through my book who compared this to sort of a digital colonialism type of debate, where you can see how some similarities between something like an East India Corporation and the big tech companies of today. So I think that's the difference. If we knew the role they played and that's what they did, but you had a strong sort of public sector, civil society that could push back on this, then you could create a technology that truly is beneficial for everybody, where you have guardrails in place. But what we're seeing here is a huge imbalance of power. And that includes, power of knowledge. We don't understand the systems as well as companies do. We can't evaluate them or hold them accountable. And currently there are no regulations. So I think that's why, we're in a position where companies are dictating not just the products that they put out, as they should, because, they have the resources to do it, but also decisions, like how it's going to be implemented in healthcare or public services.
So are you suggesting that companies like Google or Amazon or even OpenAI, they have more resources, more access to information, more power than governments themselves, than by the state?
I would say in many cases, yes. For many governments, I know I've talked to academics in Mexico, in Africa, even in India, where they do wield, more power, have more access to data for sure. Of course, it's different depending on governments, right? You have authoritarian governments that are far more far-reaching and wide-ranging in terms of their surveillance and ability to kind of track people. I talk about that in the Chinese context with AI systems and how human rights activists are trying to fight that. But of course, you have these systems are used by billions of people, and data is the sort of oil that's required to train AI systems. Nobody else has as much. Pretty much compared to the big tech companies that we have today, along with the sort of cloud infrastructure that's required to train them, right? Again, this is privately owned by 4 or so companies.
Madhu, I want to take a break in a second, and I want to get more into the details of the book, talk more about the new precariat in the AI economy. But how would you historicize AI? We've talked about Google. It's always seemed to me that even in the late 90s, Google were pioneering an AI search engine that didn't require human librarians to organize knowledge. When would you date the beginnings of this AI economy, this revolutionary economy that so troubles you in Codependent?
So as you say, AI itself as a concept and as a research area has been around really for decades. I think the name was agreed upon in the 50s, but you've had these waves of, AI summers and winters where it's never quite worked in the way that that researchers imagined that it should. And so, during these winters, you would have a huge lack of funding for people working on this, and they were sort of ridiculed as like sort of marginal fringe academics. But I would say this most recent wave really has been over the last, maybe since 2009 or 10, particularly as the mobile web has grown as well, and we've had explosion of apps built on top of mobile platforms that have meant more data than ever generated by us, through our devices. So it's the internet itself and all of the kind of posts and comments and reviews and things we put on there, and all of the digital, trails we leave behind us in terms of what we buy and what we search for. So you've had this explosion of data. Alongside that, you've had, real kind of increased sophistication of algorithms. You've had the transformer breakthrough in 2017, right, which is really the core technology that sits at the center.
Which I think Google developed, and then OpenAI has really jumped on, and it's become the core engine of their company's success.
Yeah, and it's not just OpenAI. All language models that operate today are based on a transformer technology, which, as you say, was invented at Google, but based on the work of several academics and others in Canada and elsewhere. And so, yeah, I think this combination of the data, the algorithmic breakthroughs, and the expansion of the infrastructure, the chips and the cloud, have allowed, this technology really, to take off. And essentially to come to this point where we are today.
So I know you have a hot summer going on in South London at the moment. We're in the hot summer of AI. We're not going to go back to any winters. We have NVIDIA, which at least at one point this week was the most valuable company in the world, which produces the chips for AI. You have trillion-dollar companies like Google, Amazon, of course, Microsoft, that are pioneering this economy. It's for real now, Madhu. Is that correct? That there won't be any more AI winters?
Hard to say there won't ever be. We're certainly at the top of some kind of scorching summer with the huge value gains, as you said, that we've seen in NVIDIA. There are people who sort of say this is, have we reached a top? Have we reached the top? Questioning it. So it's not that this is a false promise like it has been before. There are real breakthroughs. You can see how products can be built around it, and everyone agrees, that it is going to be there's going to be real change in the economy, and in all sorts of ways. But I think along the way we are going to see some of the bubble burst, right? There's VC money flowing into this. You have all sorts of startups saying we're AI for this and that.
Everyone's AI, Madhu. I mean, even I claim to be AI. I don't even know what it means. So what do you make of Gary Marcus? Is an old friend. He's been on the show several times. What do you make of skeptics like Gary Marcus who say, for all the big talk of AI, the technology itself is not particularly impressive, or it certainly doesn't do what it promises to do?
Look, I think that it's clearly flawed, right? And if you start picking, and that's part of my job, is to explain those flaws, right? It makes errors, so-called hallucinations, it fabricates information. You can't trust it to be a search engine, and so on. But I think I think the jury is still out on, whether it's a failed promise or not. I think it's sophisticated and impressive technology. It might not be intelligence in the way that we define it. I see no evidence for the fact that we're heading towards, artificial general intelligence or super intelligence or all these, really kind of extreme terms thrown out there. Certainly there's a race to get there, but there's no evidence we are close to it. But I think it remains a useful, and quite kind of impressive technology, considering it's purely a statistical system that is predicting the next word, right? Considering we know how the engine works, what it does is pretty impressive. But I guess I agree with Gary that I haven't seen the killer app for it yet, and everybody's still trying to figure that out. When it comes to generative AI specifically, yes, it can do good enough work when it comes to sort of copywriting or graphic design and so on, but it's not clear what the sort of revolutionary application is yet. We're still very much in an experimental stage.
Wise words on AI from a very human AI editor at the Financial Times, one of my favorite newspaper, actually, the most international of business papers. Madhumita Murgia is also the author of an important new book, Code Dependent. It's been embraced by everyone. It's already on the short list for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction in 2024. It's all about the digital disorder. And speaking of disorders, I want to remind everyone that great guests like Madhu Murgia are brought to us by our friends at Goalhanger. Excellent new podcast. Going to run a short feature on disorder. And then we'll be back with Madhu to talk specifically about code dependent and what it's like to live in the shadow of AI in the 2020s. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
Not working together anymore?
The United States, some European societies, are so divided.
And that we lurch from one crisis to the next without any coherent vision from our leaders.
There is this big space of disorder, and we're just kind of holding up our hands and going, well, don't know what we could do.
If so, Disorder, co-produced by Goalhanger, is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday, we bring together some of the world's leading thinkers to unpack our new era of global enduring disorder. And we move beyond the headlines to actually propose solutions out of this mess in our Ordering the Disorder segment.
How do you repair disorder? It's by becoming a community.
Search Disorder in your podcast app to listen right now.
Unpacking that world of disorder is my old friend Jason Pack, who is the host of Disorder. So strongly recommended, as is the new book by our guest today, Madhumita Murgia, Codependent. Madhu, congratulations again on the book, Living in the Shadow of AI. So explain what it's like in terms of the subjects of your book, what it's like to live in the shadows of AI.
Yeah, so you said now everyone's thinking about what it's like to be human, but for the sort of 10, 11 years that I've been writing about this subject, the focus has really been either on the technology or the creators of it. And for good reason. We've been really fascinated to follow the stories of these sort of maverick entrepreneurs, CEOs, builders, people like Demis Hassabis and now Sam Altman and, of course, Mark Zuckerberg. These founder stories have been really kind of fascinating to us as people who like to read about technology. But for me, the gap was kind of what happens when the technology kind of goes out into the world, who does it touch and how does it change the lives of ordinary people? And then kind of to draw back the line to say, what then can we learn about AI itself based on that, right? So I travel and go to 9 different countries in my book, to Kenya and Argentina, India, China, the Netherlands, Italy, Bulgaria, and others, the US and the UK, of course. And in each of these places, I went looking for sort of the person on the sharp end, or the other end of the AI system, the other side of the coin. So I spoke to a doctor in rural India who is implementing an AI system to help diagnose tuberculosis, for example. And there she kind of taught me about the value of why we still need human doctors, even if we have systems that can essentially do the work of a doctor, but what it means to kind of have that relationship and the trust with a professional in moments of huge vulnerability as a medical patient. I look also at gig workers all over the world, in particular focus on an Uber Eats bike cyclist in Pittsburgh, who also happens to be a Berkeley trained computer scientist, who essentially discovered that he was being underpaid consistently by Uber. And
Surprise. That's not certainly the first or the last time that's happened with Uber.
Well, yeah, and the crazy thing about that, which I thought was it kind of encapsulates what makes these systems so black box and why they dehumanize, right, is there is no wage calculator. So you're never told at the beginning of of your employment, here's what you're going to earn. Neither are you ever given an equation to help calculate what you're owed. So essentially, you're just sort of dependent on an algorithm that decides what tasks you do, but also decides what you get paid on a sort of hourly basis. It can change. And the way he discovered it is he kind of suspected, all he knew is how far he had traveled. They tell you you've traveled 2 miles, you're being paid X dollars, right? But he thought that doesn't sound right. And he extracted the GPS coordinates from a picture of his receipt and found he'd actually traveled, 3 or 4 miles. And so he built a tool that he made public to anybody on the internet, and thousands of Uber and, other drivers around the world were able to extract this information for themselves and gain some sort of agency.
Madhu, does that suggest that these supposed AI systems, they're not really very intelligent, or their intelligence is geared towards their owners making more money?
Well, yeah, the way that machine learning systems today work, right, is that they are driven by a single objective. So it means this is why people like Stuart Russell, who worry that AI is going to take over the world, say if it's got an objective, all it's trying to do is maximize to that objective, right? So in the case of an Uber wage decision algorithm, it's just trying to pay as little as possible in the most economical way. That's kind of the goal. And nobody quite knows why this was happening, but the point is it's so opaque and that there are no ways to pull it apart, that the humans involved with this, who are working at the behest of these systems, don't really have a way to question it. So, in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily the technology falling over, but it's the sort of human processes around it. The question of who is accountable when things go wrong, who's even checking, who's marking the homework of these systems, how can we tell if it's right or wrong? Really basic stuff that we seem to have sort of put to the side because we're so excited about the potential of the technology. So for me, the big takeaway was kind of, we need more voices and expertise that goes beyond the technological, not just even ethicists or social scientists, but people from education, from health, to weigh in on where we draw the lines and what we need from these systems before we all roll them out on people.
I want to get to the fixes in a second. I know you write extensively. The book, if anything, is about something called data workers, and you argue that they are as precarious as factory workers. But is the new architecture of this digital global capitalism, has the old Marxist proletariat been replaced by what we now call a precariat? And is that the engine, if that's the right word, of the AI economy, this new global precariat class that are creating value and being exploited by the data, the multi-trillion-dollar data giants like Google and Microsoft?
Yeah, I mean, I went in to, when I started reporting the book, with this question, is this a good thing or not? I knew that these workers existed, that they lived in the global south, in the majority world, they were being paid minimum wage. But I was curious to really actually explore the question of how much benefit they were getting from it. Was this changing their lives for the better, or was this purely a case of exploitation? And it's why I traveled to Nairobi and to Bulgaria to meet with them in their homes and to really try and get a sense of the arc of how their lives had been changed by these jobs. So I think, it's not as easy as just it's saying that it's this kind of exploitative slavery, which some people describe it as. There have been lives very positively impacted by having these digital jobs, refugees who are supporting their entire families through this work. But what I found is, if you sort of poke at it too hard, it starts to fall apart. So yes, people are able to earn a minimum wage and are sort of stepping out of poverty, but they remain very precarious. In most cases, cannot support an entire family, are one step away from falling back over. And you talked about the trillions, maybe billions, definitely, that have been invested into the tech, and the upside that we hope to see in the West, right? And these people weren't seeing those upsides. In many cases, in difficult working conditions, and really, their wages being suppressed and kept at that level as we train more and more complex systems, and these companies start charging for them and making money. So I just think remains a huge imbalance, and we have an opportunity to change that, as this.
So let's spend the rest of this discussion, Madhu, focusing on how we fix the future, on how to address this. Do you believe that we need more aggressive state regulation? You noted earlier that some of these companies, these multinationals, are more powerful, wealthier, with more resources than states themselves. Can states really regulate these companies?
Yes, of course, states can regulate them. That's their role. And they still are governments, and the companies, of course, will follow rules that are in place. I totally understand, that there needs to be a balance, right? We want to encourage not just companies to make the systems, but for it to get to the places it really needs to go to, and to really reach people that need it. I understand that, but I think we cannot have this flourish in a totally lawless environment. That's just not going to work.
You talk about a lawless environment. Is it currently lawless? There's all sorts of legal fights going on in U.S. courts, between the big tech companies and the U.S. state. Europe is infamous in some ways for its attack on big tech. So are we currently really in a lawless system?
So with social media, there was a delay, right? So there was a long time where the internet and then social media weren't regulated, and of course that is now changing with regulations, particularly in Europe, as you say, but the UK as well. Looking at Online Safety Act was one that came out in the last year, and so there are now regulations, and we'll see how they get enforced. And as you say, yes, the EU has really been pushing back,
Are
particularly.
they the model for you, Madhu? The Europeans, people?
No, not necessarily. I think they certainly kind of are extremely aggressive when it comes to that, and I think you can find a balance, maybe a better balance where you're not making it impossible for innovation to flourish.
Where is that balance then? The US, China?
China certainly has regulations in place, and I guess it works for them. But I think the US and the UK has kind of an interesting approach, right? They're waiting and watching to see where the technology is going before coming out and saying this is how we're going to regulate it. And I think instead what they're looking at is existing laws, as you say, not necessarily for technology, but say in healthcare, in human rights. We have existing laws in these verticals, and we can sort of upskill them for AI or sort of infuse AI into that, without necessarily writing a whole new law or sort of regulate.
What about the responsibilities, the moral responsibilities of big tech companies like Google? My wife is head of litigation at Google. So what would you like me to tell her? What are her moral responsibilities on this new economy?
It's, I think that the companies have done the most actually has been done on the self-regulation front, right? Like you have dozens of AI principles, sort of ethical guidelines and rules. Microsoft has said here are the red lines that we have on facial recognition and so on. Google has a whole series of these, OpenAI and others as well. And I think it's good to lay out where you stand on these things so people know what to expect. I just don't think that it's enough when you're starting to implement these that people are being impacted by it, children too in schools and stuff.
And should we trust guys like Sam Altman, very brilliant young man, very wealthy young man, very powerful young man, who still seems to think that AI can really make the world a dramatically better place?
Look, I don't think we should ever have to place all our trust in any one single person. We shouldn't have to be beholden to the decisions made by any individual. And that's true of sort of, godmen in India or CEOs in Silicon Valley, right? We can't expect that somebody is always going to be held to a high moral standard. We're all human. And that's why we have guardrails that prevent a single person from making like these sort of consequential decisions when you have the power of a community to help guide those decisions, right? So for me, it's not about Sam or anybody else. It's that no single person or 4 single people should be making decisions that affect billions, that there need to be more voices in that.
Madhu, finally, there's so much to talk about here. We'll have to get you back on the show, but put on your rose-tinted spectacles. The FT is a rose-tinted newspaper, at least physically. In the best possible case scenario in the next 5 or 10 years, after 10 years, it becomes science fiction. What can AI do to make humanity better off, happier, wealthier, more satisfied with itself, bringing out our real potential as humans?
As it stands today, where I feel most optimistic about is in science and health. With science, we've seen, Microsoft has done work on new material discovery. DeepMind at Google, of course, has built AlphaFold, which is an amazing biological AI tool that can allow you to invent new drugs. Others are working on sort of ways to really break through the frontiers of what we know as a species and use AI to kind of help us know more. And I think that, that could genuinely be life-changing. And similarly with healthcare, we've talked a little bit about health diagnoses, drug development and discovery. And so I think if we can harness that, we could be in a place where we're not worried about things like cancer or dementia anymore, and really augment what we know today. So I feel optimistic that if those areas of focus we continue with, we can be living better lives.
Well, Madhumita Murgia, I hope it won't be 5 years before we get you back on the show again. Your new book, Code Dependent, major new book, already shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. You're the AI editor at the FT, so much more to talk about. Congratulations, Madhu, on the new book, and keep cool in a hot London. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Can I step on the scene? I'm ready to attack. Andrew Keane, yeah, he's the one to bash. Asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He is the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew Keane, he's the one to spew. Yeah, he's an expert.